The last confirmed radio contact with Ranger Elise Calloway was logged at 5:48 p.m. on August 3, 2017. She'd been on patrol in the upper quadrant of Salt River National Park, a rugged stretch of backcountry marked by steep ridgelines, deep cut, ravines, and almost no cell coverage. For most people, it was inhospitable terrain. For Elise, it was home. At 32, she was among the most respected rangers in the Arizona Division, calm, capable, and precise. She didn't make mistakes, and she never missed check dash-ins, so when the dispatch room fell into a hushed silence during the 6 p.m. call-out, the gravity of her silence was immediate. Dispatch Supervisor Glenn Ortega tapped the mic again. Dispatch to Ranger Forking. Radio. Check over. Nothing. Just the static hiss that came from the interference of thick granite, dense forest, and distance. He tried again and again. Each attempt met with nothingness. Elise's call sign, Forking, was shorthand for her designation, Ranger 4. King Sectoron, area known for its winding horse trails, seasonal water crossings, and the remnants of mining. Activity from the late 1800s, it was not a place for beginners, and it was rarely patrolled alone. But Elise had opted for solo horseback duty that day, as she often did, riding her 11-year-old Mustang, mare named Piper she'd raised since the horse was a foal. The two were inseparable. Elise once called her a compass with hooves. Decision to go alone wasn't against protocol, but it was unusual. By 6:15 p.m., Glenn had alerted the chief ranger. By 6:30, the park's incident command was activated. By 7 o'clock, search was underway. The summer sun was still casting long shadows as teams assembled on foot, in jeeps, and on horseback. Helicopters were requested but wouldn't be able to arrive until morning. The area Elise had been patrolling was a patchwork of ridgelines and flood-prone gullies. Rangers knew that a twisted ankle or a spooked horse could easily become fatal if night set in before rescue. But there had been no call for help, no distress signal, no warning. It was as if Elise had evaporated into the wilderness. At 9:20 p.m., her father arrived at the command post. He didn't need to be called Marshal. Calloway was a legend in the Forest Service, a retired chief ranger who had spent 34 years working these very woods. Now, in his early 60s, lean and gried, he'd been following Elise's GPS ping in an app she had helped him install. The last signal at 5:49 p.m. placed her in the Black Hollow Basin, near the old Carpenter's Ridge trailhead. Then, nothing, no movement, no further pings. Know that ridge, he told Incident Commander Neil Pershing. And I know my daughter. You've got about an hour before you lose the light. Start with the basin. If Piper was hurt, she wouldn't leave her. The basin was dense and overgrown, its steep walls acting like a signal trap. A small crew of searchers hiked in before nightfall, calling her name, flashing beams of high-powered lights across the landscape. But the forest swallowed every sound. No prints, no dropped radio, no sign of the horse by sunrise. More than 40 personnel had arrived, rangers from other districts. Volunteers at K-9 unit from Prescott, helicopters buzzed the sky. They scoured the logical trails, first places where a horse might have slipped or bolted. A ranger down was not just a tragedy, it was a crisis. But the park gave them nothing. That day blurred into the next, and then another. The search expanded outward in concentric rings, but the center remained maddeningly blank. No Piper, no Elise, no... Trace it all. The official search lasted 11 days. On the 12th, Elise was declared missing, presumed deceased.
Oh.
No funeral was held.
Oh.
There was nothing to bury. Marshall didn't speak at the press conference. His hands were balled into fists at his sides the entire time. Search conditions were extreme, the park supervisor said, glancing down at the statement written for him by the PR office. Terrain this remote often holds its secrets for years. We remain committed to monitoring the area and following up on any and all leads. Elise was a valued member of this team. We are heartbroken. By week 3, the national coverage had faded. Few websites ran stories with headlines like, Ranger vanishes in Arizona's most dangerous backcountry. Where's Elise Calloway? The mysterious disappearance that's still baffling park investigators, but eventually, Even those were buried under new tragedies, new news cycles, all except one man. Marshall's house outside Winslow slowly turned into something else. What had once been a retirement cabin became a command center. Maps stretched across every wall. Pins and yarn, old trail guides, annotated topography, every detail was tracked. Over the next year, he walked nearly every foot of the King sector on foot. Not once. Dozens of times. He wasn't looking for a body. He was looking for the question, because Elise Calloway didn't just vanish. Something had happened, something wrong, and Marshall was going to find out what. The break came 5 years later. On a blue sky morning in September 2022, when a group of geology undergraduates from Northern Arizona University were mapping sediment, buildup in an isolated wash known locally as Dry Snap Canyon, the area was off-trail, difficult to access. Their professor, Dr. Angela Ng, had selected it specifically because of its lack of foot traffic, less contamination, cleaner soil samples. They were dragging a ground-penetrating radar unit across a strip of flat earth when the screen glitched, then lit up with an unexpected return signal, one that didn't match any natural geological feature. It was a solid, compact mass about 5 feet long and 3 feet wide. Angular, not rock, not. Dr. Ng assumed it was an old mining barrel or perhaps an abandoned water tank, but it was deep nearly 4 feet below surface, and it was giving off a strange echo, out of curiosity more than alarm. She requested a shallow excavation permit from the park's archaeology department. It took 3 weeks to come through. On October 3rd, her team returned with trowels and brushes. They began digging. At exactly 18 inches, they struck something. It wasn't metal or ceramic. It was a curve of pale ivory, a ridge. Then another, it was a rib cage. By the end of the day, they had uncovered what appeared to be a fully articulated horse skeleton, remarkably preserved, laid carefully on its side, front hooves curled. There were no scavenger marks. No animal activity. Sight looked deliberate. Dr. Ng stopped digging immediately and called the Park Service. The first ranger on scene was a man named Carlton Voss, a 19-year veteran of Salt River. He stared at the bones for nearly a full minute before quietly radioing. I think we've found Piper. Within hours, the canyon was sealed off with crime scene tape. For the first time in half a decade, the name Elise Calloway echoed across the park radios. The FBI was notified. Elise had been a federal officer. Her case had never been closed. Mobile command unit was set up at the old visitor station. The skeleton was carefully lifted from the pit and placed on a sterile blue tarp. A forensic anthropologist, Dr. Lena Martinez, is flown in from Denver. The bones told a story, not just of death, but of violence. Hairline fractures along the front leg. A compression break on one side of the rib cage, embedded inside the splintered right foreleg bone under magnification. Dr. Martinez found a sliver of foreign material, a fragment of metal, dark, brittle, no oxidation, unusual density. It wasn't a bullet, and it wasn't an accident. Dr. Martinez sealed the fragment into an evidence bag and quietly requested a deeper soil analysis of the burial pit. A few days later, private courier arrived with a sealed case. Inside, the horse's shoes, rusty but intact, and marked with a tiny, nearly invisible NHA subtle identifier used by only one farrier in the region. Marshall Calloway, who was called in to confirm. He didn't speak when he saw the shoes. He simply nodded once. The horse was Piper. There was no trace of Elise's remains. But now the question was different. Not just where is Elise, but why was Piper buried so carefully, and who did it? Detective Maya Rennick arrived from the FBI's Cold Case Division 2 days later. She was a former field agent turned forensic coordinator, known for her quiet efficiency and almost unnerving attention to detail. She reviewed the old case file in a single night. Then she met Marshall Calloway. He didn't say much at first, just laid a long, canvas-wrapped roll onto the table and unspooled it. It was a topographical map of the park's northeast quadrant, annotated with a decade's worth of markings. Red for collapsed RIDGList, blue for false trails, green for historical. Homestead sites, and yellow dozens of tiny, meticulous yellow X's for places he'd searched. Maya studied it without speaking for over 10 minutes. This, she finally said, is more thorough than our entire 2017 file. Marshall only shrugged. I wasn't looking for proof, he said. I was looking for something that didn't fit. Did you find it? He pointed at the map. Here, he said. This canyon. Dry snap. We never searched it. Maya looked up. Why not? His eyes were clear, because it wasn't on. Any maps in 2017? And Elise wouldn't have gone there unless she was following someone. Maya stared at the skeleton photo on her tablet. The neatly buried body, the old soil, and the metal embedded in the horse's leg. What did she see? She whispered. That made someone want to make her disappear? What had Elise stumbled upon in those woods? And why had her horse been buried like a fallen soldier? They had 5-year-old bones, a weapon fragment, and a direction. The investigation was no longer about recovery. It was about justice. At 4:12 a.m. on October 9th, 2022, a beige Ford Suburban rolled quietly through the gates of Salt River National Park. The park was still closed to the public pending the investigation, though signs at the main entrance cited trail damage and wildlife monitoring as the official reason. The truth, of course, was grimmer. Inside the vehicle sat Detective Maya Rennick and Special Agent Frank Toller, a forensic tech flown in from Quantico's Materials Analysis Unit, in the back seat, cased in a thick layer of foam and padding. Was the tiny metal shard recovered from Piper's leg? Toller had spent the last 48 hours running tests at a specialized facility in Tucson. He was pale from lack of sleep, but alert, riding the high that came with a breakthrough. Maya waited until the park HQ came into view before speaking. You're sure? She asked. Toller nodded, adjusting the case beside him. It's tungsten. Carbide, he said. Specifically a brittle alloy used in geologic rock hammers, not the type sold at hardware stores. This is a prospector's tool, field-rated, probably customized. Maya parked in the gravel lot behind the closed visitor center. The temporary command tent buzzed with early morning activity rangers reviewing trail maps, FBI agents sipping burnt coffee, and a whiteboard covered in a timeline that now stretched 5 feet across. Same as the 2003 case. Maya muttered. Toller blinked. Sorry, doesn't matter, she said, exiting the vehicle. Walk me through it again. Toller followed her into the tent, nodding at the ranger stationed at the entrance. Picture this, said, lifting the case onto the center table. You've got a hard alloy used in mining and archaeology, something that retains sharpness against granite. When it strikes something like bone, especially under pressure, say a panic swing from a grown man it fractures, that's what embedded the shard. Maya stared at the sliver in its sterile bag, then at the map behind her. So we're not looking at a wild animal attack, she said. Someone hit that horse with a rock hammer, either to kill it or to stop it, and then they buried it. Toller added with care. That same morning, Marshall Calloway stood alone at the base of Dry Snap Canyon. He wasn't supposed to be there. The ravine had been closed off, its perimeter marked with yellow tape and laminated FBI signage. But Marshall had spent years navigating bureaucratic fences. This one didn't even slow him down. He crouched by the edge of the dig site where Piper had been exhumed. The earth was soft and discolored from recent disturbance, but the edges of the pit were still visible, a clean rectangle. He brushed away a loose tuft of soil, staring at the dark imprint left by the mare's body. You didn't? Panic, he murmured. You planned this. He wasn't talking to Elise. He was talking to the man who had buried the horse, because this wasn't the act of someone trying to hide a crime. This was ritual. Later that afternoon, Maya received a call from the National Park Service Historical Records Division. A clerk in Denver had flagged something unusual during a cross-check of excavation permits. Specifically, a string of denied permit requests. It's filed in 2016 and 2017 by the same individual, Kieran Holt. Local address. Former surveyor, is now listed as self-employed historical consultant. He had applied multiple times to explore restricted ruins within the King's sector. All requests had been denied due to the area's sensitive ecological status. Maya had never heard of him. She pulled up the 2017 investigation file. Holt's name appeared once buried in a report written by Elise herself, dated June 12, 2017. Subject: unauthorized digging near burnt tree, trail according to the report. Elise had encountered Holt digging near the remnants of an old mining foundation. He'd claimed to be searching for mineral indicators. Elise had issued a warning and confiscated an improvised digging Tula rock hammer. No citation. No arrest. It was standard procedure. But 2 months later, Elise vanished. Maya stared at the entry, her fingers tightening around the page. Then she called for Agent Toller. "Run a name," she said. "Kieran Holt. Check for purchases of rock hammers, especially tungsten carbide tips." By midnight, they had confirmation. A 2015 invoice from an online geology supply store in Flagstaff showed Holt had purchased a field kit, including a high-end Estwing prospector's hammer fitted with a tungsten carbide alloy tip. One of only 12 orders for that specific configuration in the entire state that year. Maya stood silently by the evidence board, one hand on the photo of Piper's remains. So the man Elise confronted, she said, was swinging the exact type of hammer that left a fragment in her horse's leg. Toller said nothing. They both knew what it meant. They had their first suspect. They brought in Holt the next morning. He was 58, wiry and sun-worn, with a trimmed beard and calloused hands. He didn't flinch when the agents showed up at his property just outside the park boundary, a sprawling, poorly kept home filled with boxes of rusted nails, chipped pottery, and yellowing maps. He welcomed them in like a man who'd been expecting this day for years. "About time," he said, almost cheerfully. He sat across from Maya in the visitor center's makeshift interview room, cracked mug of black coffee steaming beside him. "You knew Elise Calloway?" Maya asked. "I knew of her," Holt replied. "She wrote me up once, told me not to come back. I didn't. You submitted 3 more permit requests after that." He shrugged. "Didn't mean I came back." Maya laid out the photograph of the metal fragment. This was embedded in a horse's leg. Her horse, found buried in a canyon no one had access to, except maybe you. "The alloy matches a hammer you ordered in 2015. He raised his eyebrows but didn't look surprised. "You got a body? We have the horse." "Then you don't have much," he said, leaning back. Maya didn't blink. "Do you still have the hammer?" "I broke it years ago, threw it away." "Lost it," he said, smiling faintly. "Somewhere in the park." She stared at him for several seconds. Then she said, "Let's go look." That afternoon, Holt led a team of agents to the edge of the King sector. He moved with confidence, his boots crunching through old gravel beds and overgrown brush. He spoke freely as they walked. "The area is littered with old dig sites," he said. "Mining towns popped up and died within a year. Some folks were smarter than others, buried stuff to come back for. Problem is, most of it's been wiped off the map. Only way to find it is by instinct." They reached a clearing where old stone foundations barely poked through the dirt. "This one was called Cassian Gulch," Holt said. "Had a tin smelter, 1 postmaster, and 5 graves." Maya scanned the perimeter. "You brought her here?" "Didn't bring anyone here," he replied. "But you knew this place wasn't on the official maps." He smiled thinly. "That's the whole point." Back at headquarters, Maya made a decision. They needed someone who knew these woods even better than Holt. That night, she drove out to Marshall's cabin. He was already outside when she arrived, sitting on the porch with a lantern and a notebook open across his knees. "I need your help," Maya said. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no. By morning, they had a plan. Marshall would walk Holt's trail again, alone this time looking. Not just for the hammer, but for intent. Because Holt wasn't sloppy. If he had buried Piper, he hadn't done it to hide the crime. He had done it for a reason, and if they could understand why, they might finally figure out what happened to Elise. Over. The next 4 days, Marshall moved through the backcountry like a man possessed. He followed old markers, ghost trails, and long-faded game tracks. Each night he returned with notes, locations, scents, broken branches, discoloration in the soil, and on the fifth day he found something, about a mile west of Dry Snap Canyon. Tucked beneath a cliff ledge and concealed by a thick blanket of moss and brush was a narrow vertical shaft, not natural. Dynamite scars marked the edges. A mine? Possibly. But too shallow. He lowered himself in using a rope he'd anchored to a nearby pine. At the bottom, found a tarp, half frotted, with rusted stakes at the corners, and beneath it, scraps of cloth, green-gray, nylon torn. A ranger's uniform. He didn't touch anything, just stared for a long moment, then radioed Maya. "I found where it happened," he said quietly, "and I think we might still find her." By the time Maya arrived, forensic specialists were already rappelling into the shaft. They uncovered more fabric, a cracked utility belt, and a radio battered but intact enough to show the last outgoing. Signal, 5:48 p.m. Elise's final check-in. But there was something else. Too wedged in a crevice near the base of the shaft was a boot print. Old, deteriorated, but unmistakably human, and next to it a small, polished stone. Not from the local geology, smooth, egg-shaped, marked with a carved symbol, a triangle, bisected vertically. Marshall knelt beside it, breath-catching. "That's not from a mining camp," he whispered. "That's personal." Picked it up with gloved hands and turned it over. On the underside, faint but visible, was a second marking, 3 initials. KHC. She looked at Marshall. "Elise wasn't killed because she interrupted someone," she said. "She was following something." Marshall nodded, face pale. "KHC," he said. "What does it mean?" He looked at the canyon walls. Not what he said. Who? And just like that, the investigation exploded in a new direction. Because now they had a new name, and Elise's killer might not have been a poacher. He might have been something far worse. The initials KHC became the fulcrum of everything. In just 3 letters, the mystery shifted again from a cold trail of wilderness violence to something more deliberate, personal, and possibly far older than anyone suspected. Detective Maya. Rennick didn't sleep that night. She sat in the command tent with the marked stone turning slowly in her gloved fingers. They had bagged and tagged it for evidence, but not before she got a long look at the symbol. A perfect triangle, bisected by a single vertical line etched into the dark polished surface. The edges were warm. This wasn't recent. Whoever had carved it had done so with intention. Using tools precise enough to avoid gouging the stone, the initials underneath were a mystery, K.H.C. Not a park employee. Not a ranger. Not a local historian. The name didn't match anyone from the original 2017 suspect pool either. But something about the shape of the stone, the craftsmanship, the geometry, the deliberate way it had been placed, kept Maya's mind awake long after the lights were cut in the tent. It hadn't fallen into the crevice. It had been left, and if Elise Calloway had found this 5 years ago, she would have followed it. The next morning, Maya met with Marshall Calloway on the ridge overlooking the mine shaft. The air was crisp and still. The crew had gone. The shaft had been marked off with metal stakes and nylon ribbon, and the preliminary forensic sweep had collected the uniform remnants, the cracked belt, the destroyed radio, nothing else. But Marshall wasn't looking at the shaft. He was staring at the surrounding Tarandi pine forest to the north, ragged ridgeline to the east, and a barely there trail that dipped toward a second ravine. Shaded and colder than the others. "Found something?" Maya asked, crunching across the gravel to stand beside him. "Maybe," he said, voice low. "When I was a young ranger, there were rumors of a pre-park settlement out here. Not one of the mining towns, something else. A place never listed." "On the official maps, why not?" "'Cause it didn't last long," Marshall replied. "Wasn't sanctioned. Some said it was a religious commune. Others said it was a survivalist outfit. No documentation. Just stories passed around campfires." "You think Elise found it?" "I think she was following the same trail I am now," he said, pointing toward the shaded ravine. Maya followed. His gaze? You think KHC has something to do with that place? Marshall's face tightened. I think he came from there. They started digging figuratively first. That afternoon, Maya sent a request to the Arizona Historical Registry. And the Bureau of Land Management, specifically, she wanted non-official references, rejected permits, land disputes, fire records, even old census data for the counties surrounding Salt River National Park. What she got back wasn't much, but it was enough. In a 1921 U.S. Census, enumeration log for a failed farming town called Bow Creek, located just 30 miles southeast of the park, there was a household listed as Holt Kyron H., age 42, spiritual leader. Wife, Nadine Holt, age 37. Children, Ezra 14, Marion 10, Dan Kyron Jr. 3. Maya stared at the name. Kyron H. Holt. Her breath caught. She checked the original application Elise had filed in 2017 against a man named Kieran Holt. Same spelling. No middle initial. Different birth year, but in the amateur poacher's original request for access to the ruins, the email domain had included a strange subname, Holt Clan 3. It was enough. She ordered a full genealogical background check on the Holt's family line. The result took 3 hours, but when it came back, it confirmed what she'd begun to fear. The Kieran Holt they had interviewed wasn't just a poacher. He was the grandson of Kieran H. Collister, Holtkhc, and the name matched again, a different document Maya hadn't seen until now. A federal arrest warrant from 1934, issued under the Sedition Act, against one Kieran Holt Collister, founder of a separatist sect known as the Eighth Witness Assemblia, survivalist, religious group that had vanished into Arizona's wilderness during the Great Depression and been presumed disbanded after a fire destroyed their homestead compound in 1936. But that wasn't entirely true, because if Collister Holt had family, they didn't disappear. They moved right into the canyons that would become Salt River National Park. Maya brought the file to Marshall that night. They laid the records out on the long wooden table in his cabin, documents yellowed with time, edges curling, names half finked and half fierced. A cult, Marshall said softly, flipping through the census logs. Out here. They wouldn't have called themselves that, Maya replied. But the structure is all there. One founder. Centralized theology. Isolationist tendencies. Some fire-damaged documents mention a doctrine of natural reclamation, giving back to the land what was taken. Burial rights, among other things, Maya said. This man KHC believed the earth had to be fed to remain balanced. Marshall looked grim. Then burying Piper wasn't kindness. No, Maya said. It was doctrine. The next morning, they brought Kieran Holt back in. Not under arrest. Not yet. But Maya didn't need a warrant to ask questions. She laid the documents across the interview table one by one. The genealogy chart, the census record, the arrest warrant. She pointed to the name Kieran Holt Collister. Your grandfather? She asked. Kieran stared at the paper for a long time. Then finally, he nodded once. Yes. Maya leaned in. Is that what this was? A revival? You were out there looking for him? Kieran's voice was soft. I was looking for what he left behind. What did Elise find? She asked. What did she see that made her follow you? Kieran exhaled. His hands trembled faintly. She followed me to the old path, he said. The one that goes to the hollow. Maya's pulse jumped. What hollow? He looked at her now, his eyes not defiant, not afraid, just tired. There's a place, he said. We don't talk about it, but it's there. Where? In the basin, past the split oak, Kieran whispered. It's where the founder wrote the final scripture. Where the others went underground? Others, Maya asked. How many? Kieran shook his head. I only ever saw one. He said, a girl, maybe 14. She watched me when I was digging, said nothing, just stood there, then vanished. When was this? 5 years ago, he said. week before the ranger disappeared. Maya's hands clenched on the table edge. Did you kill Elise? No, Kieran said firmly. I left. I ran. I knew they were watching. I was scared she'd seen too much. He stopped. They'd what? Maya pressed, but Kieran only closed his eyes. She walked into something she didn't understand. He whispered, and they took her. They searched. The area Kieran described, it took days. The split oak was a local landmark. It's visible only from a narrow ravine trail in the northern quadrant. Past it, an old footpath, overgrown, hidden by brush, not on any park. Maya followed it with Marshall. Flanked by 2 FBI field agents, it dipped into a basin so choked with pine and stone that sunlight barely reached the floor. And there, half buried in moss and needles, was a flat stone altar, carved with the same triangle symbol, and beside it bones. Human, but not Elise. They were old, decades old, some scattered, some bound, no clothing, no markers, but undeniably arranged with purpose. Marshall stared at the scene in silence, and Maya finally spoke the words neither of them wanted to say aloud. This was never about poaching, she said. Marshall nodded. No, he said. This was inheritance. As night fell, Maya looked at the map again. The triangle symbol, the initials, the buried horse, the missing ranger, Kieran. Holt hadn't killed Elise, but he had led her to something ancient, something she hadn't been meant to see, and now Maya understood what had really happened that day in 2017. Elise Calloway hadn't vanished on patrol. She had walked into the hollow, and the hollow had kept her. The hollow had a name now, not an official one. There was no listing for it in any park database, no mention in historical records or trail maps, but it existed. And in this investigation, that was enough. What they found in the basin altered everything. The stone altar, the triangle symbol, carefully arranged bones, and beneath the soil, a second find, one that wouldn't be unearthed until forensic crews brought in deeper scanning equipment. A cavity, roughly 6 feet deep, and inside, a series of small wooden boxes bound with copper wire. They were delicate, hand-carved. A few had rotted to pieces, but 2 were intact. Inside them were artifacts unlike anything Maya had encountered before in the field. They weren't tools, or coins, or pottery. They were personal. One contained strands of braided hair, blonde, preserved in what appeared to be beeswax and resin. The second contained pressed flowers and a strip of cloth, and inked on the cloth in near-faded script, "You only give what you can never take back." The handwriting was unmistakably 20th century. The script, though shaky, was practiced. Maya handed it to the forensic linguist back at HQ 2 hours later. She had confirmation. The handwriting matched a sample from a 1931 letter penned by Kyron Holt Collister, patriarch of the Eighth Witness Assembly. He hadn't just founded a sect. He had founded this place. The hollow wasn't an idea. It was real Agent Frank. Toller arrived back in the park on October 17th with the latest materials report. Maya had been expecting more analysis of the altar stone or an update on the field kit purchases from the Holt family instead. He walked straight into her tent and dropped a photograph onto the table. It was a shot of a bone femur, cracked clean at the midpoint. A few of the remains recovered from the hollow basin show evidence of sharp force trauma, he said. Human? Maya asked. Possibly. We found tool marks bladed. Maybe ceremonial. Maya stared at the photo. How old are we talking? Pre-1950s? But there's no weathering. Soil composition preserved them. We're estimating some bones could be as recent as the late 80s. She looked up sharply. You're saying the hollow's been active? Toller nodded. Not recently, but long after the assembly was thought to be gone. Maya felt her stomach. Not how many individuals? 17, Toller said. That we can confirm. Maya sat down slowly. 17. That wasn't a survivalist settlement. That was a body count, and none of it explained where Elise Calloway was. Still no body, still no trace. But now, a second terrifying truth was emerging. Whatever Elise had found out here wasn't dead. It had been waiting. That night, Maya sat down. With Kieran Holt again, he was still under observation, though not under arrest. His cooperation had been full and willing, and so far, the evidence placed him at the periphery of the hollow knot inside it. But she was done with oblique references. "I need you to tell me about the girl," she said. "It's the one you saw watching you. The week before Elise disappeared." Kieran was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She didn't speak. Just stood there, blonde hair, pale eyes, barefoot." Maya's throat tightened. "Describe the location." "She was standing where the Basin Trail forks east, just before the hollow." "Did you talk to her?" "No," he said, "but I saw the mark." "What mark?" He raised a shaking hand and traced it in the air. A triangle, the vertical line. Maya leaned in. "She was one of them." "I think she is one of them," Kieran whispered. "Still out there." Maya felt her blood run cold. "You think Elise is still alive?" Kieran didn't answer right away, but his eyes didn't look away either. "I think someone is keeping her." They reopened the search grid. Marshal Calloway returned to the field the next morning, flanked by 2 tactical rangers and an expert in wilderness containment. They began combing the ravines north of the hollow. But this time, they weren't looking for caves. They were looking for signs of habitation, and they found it. Not a shelter, not a cabin, but a clearing, unmarked, remote. And in the middle of it, hung from a crossbeam between 2 trees, was a wind chime made of bones, animal. Mostly, but one piece, slender and curved, was human. Maya was on site within 2 hours. She stood under the chime and let the wind move it. The sound was hollow, eerie. It echoed down the ridge like a whisper. She turned to Marshall. "What does this mean?" Marshall's face was carved from stone. "It means someone's been warning us to stop." Back at headquarters, Maya reopened the original logs from Elise's final week. There was one note Triton 2 days before she vanished. She patrolled Old Copper Ridge today. No signs of recent dig sites, but found an unusual burn ring near Point 9. Looked deliberate. "We'll follow up later this week." Point 9 wasn't anywhere near the dig sites. Kieran had been working. It was east, toward the hollow, toward the wind chime. Maya checked the GPS logs again. Elise's last ping had come from directly between the burn ring and the hollow basin. She hadn't just stumbled into it, she was tracking it. And whoever lived out there had been watching her back. That night, Marshall sat in his cabin alone. He took down a wooden box from a high shelf. Inside were Elise's notebooks. Not her official logbooks, her personal ones, the ones she kept for herself. He flipped through, until he found the last entry, dated July 30th, 2017, 4 days before she disappeared. "I saw her again. Same girl, same place. She didn't run, just watched. I know it's not protocol, but I'm going back tomorrow. I have to know what's out there." Marshall closed the notebook. His hand trembled slightly. "She knew," he whispered to himself. "She knew something was wrong." He looked up at the wall, at the maps, at the hollow, and the space beyond it. Still unsearched, still silent. On October 22nd, Maya authorized a restricted sweep beyond the hollow basin. This was uncharted territory. Not just for the park, but for the FBI. They deployed thermal imaging drones. The first sweep returned nothing, but the second sweep, conducted at 2:17 a.m., showed a heat signature, a small, steady pulse. Approximately the size of a person, stationary, tucked inside. A rock crevice northeast of the basin. Maya was alerted immediately. Within the hour, a 5-person team was mobilized, and at 4:41 a.m., they reached the source. It was a shelter built into the rock, primitive and empty, but not abandoned. The fire pit was warm, the bedding was made, and hanging above the entry. Marked into the stone with soot and ash a triangle and a single vertical line. Below it, scrawled in charcoal. "She's not done walking." Maya didn't sleep that night. She stood in the clearing with the chime, the hollow behind her, the crevice ahead, somewhere in the dark. Elise had gone further, and someone had gone with her. Someone still out there. Still waiting. The search wasn't over. It was just beginning. By dawn, on October 23, 2022, the tone inside Salt River National Park's command center had shifted completely. This was no longer a cold case. This was a live operation. The discovery of the rock shelter recently used, carefully constructed, and marked with the triangle landline symbol was a seismic moment. No bodies, no confrontation. But the implications were undeniable. Someone was alive out there, and they had seen Elise Calloway, or worse, they were keeping her. The message above the shelter's entrance had been crude, drawn in charcoal that would wash away in the next hard rain, but its meaning chilled every agent and ranger who saw it. She's not done walking. Statement not. Past tense, present, active. It meant whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were doing, and that the searchers had only just caught up. Maya Rennick didn't waste time. Within 2 hours, she convened an emergency briefing. Maps were spread across 2 folding tables, layered with overlays from drone heat signatures, trail camera data, and hand-drawn annotations collected over the years by Marshall Calloway. Maya stood in front of a satellite projection of the northeast quadrant, tapping a red-circled zone just north of the Hollow Basin. "This is our window," she said, her voice low but steady. "The shelter sits in a dead zone between 2 ridgelines. No established trails. No reason for anyone to be there unless they're hiding." Marshall stood beside her, arms folded tightly, jaw clenched. His eyes hadn't left the map since it had been rolled out. "I've crossed that ridge once," he said, "years ago. The terrain's steep, but passable if you know where to look." "Would Elise have gone up it?" Maya asked. Marshall didn't hesitate. She'd follow anyone who needed help. That was her nature. Maya nodded once, then looked up at the room. "We move at nightfall." The team that left at 6:14 p.m. was small by design. 6 members. 2 FBI tactical agents. 1 Sir Chandraskew, medic, Maya, Marshall, and a park tracker named Jesse Greaves, whose sense of direction was better than GPS. They carried only what they needed: rations. Satellite comes, infrared gear, medical packs, and sidearms. Just in case no one said it aloud, but the possibility that they were walking into an active cult stronghold hovered over the operation like a shadow. This wasn't just a rescue. This was extraction. The trail was nearly invisible. The hollow faded behind them as the team moved through thick underbrush, their steps quiet but determined. Marshall led, counting landmarks in his head. Boulder with a split down the center. Twisted pine with 3 trunks. Dry wash crossing the game trail. All still there. All exactly where he remembered. And then Nat 831. They found it. The cave, it. Wasn't much at first glance. A low opening in a sheer rock wall, partially hidden behind a curtain of moss and vines. No obvious path. No artificial markers, but the air pouring from the opening was warm and faintly scented, not foul, not decaying. Burned herbs. Jesse paused and held up a hand. He knelt out, brushing his fingers across the dirt just outside the mouth. Prince barefoot, and recent he looked up. Someone's inside. The team split into entry formation. Maya was second, in her heart hammering as she ducked beneath the rock overhang and followed the narrow crawl space that quickly widened into a chamber. Then she stopped. It wasn't a cave. It was a home. A rough one, yes, but lived in. There were hand-woven mats made of pine needles, dried herbs hanging from a rope line, carved wooden cup, and in the center, a small stone ring, blackened from hundreds of fires, but no people. Not at first then, from the far end. Where the shadows deepened, sound movement, a figure emerged, thin, dressed in worn clothes, made of stitched leather and canvas. Hair matted with dirt and time. A girl, maybe. 18, eyes pale as frost. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just looked at. Then she pointed. Not at Maya, not at the team, but at Marshall. "You're her blood," she said, voice rasped. "With disuse, you carry her name." Marshall stared, frozen. "Where is she?" he said. "Where's Elise?" The girl stepped forward and said 4 words that turned Maya's blood to ice. "She walks the path." They didn't get much more out of her that night. The girl, who called herself Lanu, spoke in fragmented thoughts, as though language itself was an afterthought. But from what they could gather, she was born here, raised here, as the last descendant of those who once lived in the Hollow Basin. She'd been alone for some time, but not always. She described Elise with reverence. "The strong one," she said. "The one who didn't kneel." According to Lina, Elise had arrived injured. A leg wound, likely from the incident with Piper. She had been taken by the Watchers to a place deeper in the forest. They tried to take her mind, Lina said. But she remembered the flowers. "What flowers?" Maya asked. Lina pointed at a bundle of dried thistles tied above the fire pit. Maya felt the breath catch in her throat. That plant. She recognized it. Yellow star thistle. The same kind found in Elise's pouch when her uniform was recovered. Back at HQ, Amia contacted botanist Dr. Emery Jung, who had consulted on the 2017 case. He confirmed the plant's invasive properties and noted that Elise had once been part of a program to document and eliminate foreign flora from native meadows. She was obsessed with it, he said. Said it was the kind of thing that choked out everything good if you weren't watching. Maya stared at the thistle, now withered. But intact, Elise had left them behind for a reason, a sign, a breadcrumb. She was still walking the path, and now they were close. The next morning, Lina led them to the cleft, a narrow fissure in the rock. Nearly a mile east of the cave, they descended by rope at the bottom. A tunnel cut by hand, torch scars on the walls. Maya followed Lina in silence. The others behind her, they passed etching symbols from the assembly's texts, carved into the walls like scripture, and then the tunnel opened into a chamber, a sanctuary, stone benches, central altar, burned candle remains, and on the far side, behind a curtain of faded cloth, a figure, sitting eyes closed, hair streaked with gray. Maya's breath caught. Elise. The woman stirred, lifted her head, eyes opened slowly. She didn't speak, but the recognition was instant. She knew them. She knew her father. Marshall stepped forward. "Ellie," he whispered. Elise stood slowly, unsteady, but alive. She took one step forward, then another, and collapsed into his arms. The hike out was slow, brutal. Elise was underweight, dehydrated, suffering from severe sensory deprivation. But she walked, refused a stretcher. She wanted to feel the ground again. Back at HQ, medics swarmed her, but Elise said little. Her voice was weak, her memory fragmented. But one thing was clear. She hadn't just survived, she had endured. They had tried to change her, but she'd held on to the flowers. To Piper, to herself. Maya sat with her after the first meal. The sun was rising, and Elise whispered, "They buried Piper, like a sister. That's what they called her. My sister of breath." Maya nodded slowly. "They thought she was part of you. They thought she had to go back into the ground," Elise said, tears in her eyes. "And me?" She looked up. "They thought I had to watch." Lina was placed in protective custody. She spoke little, ate less. But when asked if there were more like her, more still in the woods, she simply said, "Some never leave the trees." And with that, the hollow was sealed again. Not gone, not defeated, but found. And Elise Calloway, she was home. But something had changed in her eyes. Not broken, not lost, but older. She still walked the path, even if the rest of her would never leave the woods entirely. Elise Calloway didn't speak for the first 48 hours after her return, not because she couldn't, because she was choosing when to let the words come. Marshall understood. He sat beside her in the infirmary's private recovery cabin, no questions. No pressure, just presence. They watched the wind thread through the pines together, silent like they were waiting for the forest to say something first. but the forest didn't speak when she finally did. It was in the early morning, her voice barely above a breath. "Do you still have my pouch?" Marshall nodded, arose and pulled it from his coat. The weathered leather thistle pouch had been tagged and catalogued as evidence but returned to him afterward. He'd kept it in a drawer in his home. Elise's hands trembled slightly as she took it. "Everything else was taken," she whispered, "except this. I hid it under a rock near the ridge when I first saw them." Maya Rennick had just arrived outside the cabin when she overheard that. She stepped in slowly, holding her notebook. "Elise," she said gently, "what do you mean you saw them?" Elise looked at her now. There was clarity in her eyes.
Oh, yes.
Number. Confusion. No psychosis. Only memory. They were waiting for me, not just watching. Waiting. That morning, Elise gave her first full statement. Maya recorded it with 2 agents present, but no one interrupted her, not once. She spoke for 41 minutes straight about the day Piper had been struck, the sound the metal made, the moment of confusion. Before she saw the Mankaran Holt scrambling out of the brush, "He was digging," she said. "He didn't see me until it was too late. When he ran, I should have called it in, should have followed protocol. But I'd seen his name before. He kept filing permits, getting denied, then showing up anyway." So Elise followed him, through ravines, around switchbacks. She thought she'd lost him until she saw the girl, blonde, barefoot, maybe 15, watching from a ridge. "She didn't run when I saw her. She turned and walked. I followed her instead. That's how she found the hollow. Not all at once. First the clearing with the wind chime, then the fire ring, then the altar. She took pictures. With her park-issued digital camera. Marked coordinates in her notebook. She planned to come back the next day with a team, but they came first. 3 of them. She said painted faces, not masks. Real paint, charcoal, clay, and eyes so pale they almost didn't look human. In the dark, she remembered fighting, screaming, Piper panicking, a blow to the back of her head, and then blackness. When she woke, she was in a room with no windows. Stone walls. Dirt floor. The only light came through a small gap near the ceiling. They didn't tie her. They just watched. A woman brought food. Boiled roots, mushrooms, water steeped with something bitter. Elise feigned compliance. She waited. She memorized faces, voices, the direction of footsteps outside her cell. Over time, they began to speak, to teach, scriptures etched onto bone. Lessons spoken in half-whispers and riddles. They called themselves the Final Hollow and Elise. They believed. She was meant to be there. You arrived with the animal. You carried the seed pouch. You didn't speak the name of cities. You were chosen. She played along. She learned they spoke of a coming return, reawakening, and a word she heard over and over again. Karen. Maya leaned forward. You said Karen? Elise nodded. They said he would rise again. That the watcher in the stone was not dead, only dreaming. That I had come as the signal. The bridge. Maya scribbled furiously in her notes, because Karen wasn't just a name, it was a translation. In Greek mythology, Karen was the ferryman of the dead, and in Elise's context, he was more than metaphor. He was a presence. Elise paused then, her gaze far away. There were nights I heard breathing, she said. Not outside, below, in the tunnels. She finally looked at Maya. You haven't found the bottom. You think the hollow is one place? It's not. She pointed to the map behind her. It's a network. Beneath all of this, and there, still down there. By October 29th, forensic teams had discovered 6 additional vertical shafts, some filled in. Some still passable, but none went deeper than 40 feet, until the 7th. Located north of the wind chime clearing, obscured by a false rockfall, the shaft was nearly vertical and far older than the rest. The entrance had been camouflaged with an interlocking ring of pine roots. Drone footage inside showed a descent of over 120 feet, and something else. A chamber, perfectly square, carved stone walls, and in the center a stone slab, flat, clean, undisturbed. The footage ended with static signal. Interference, no metal, but something beneath the slab gave off a low, thermal signature. Elise was placed under protection. She had no home to return to. Her cabin had long since been reassigned, and the press had caught wind of her recovery. Maya insisted on a private location, ranger station with only one other occupant, Marshall. He hadn't left her side since her return. That night, Elise asked him for something. Her old uniform. He found it, tucked into a file box marked personal effects. She put it on, slowly, methodically. When she emerged, Marshall almost couldn't speak. "You're still one of us," he said. She met his eyes. "I never stopped being." Then she asked, "Can I see where you found Piper?" "God, on October 31st. Exactly. 5 years and 89 days after Elise Calloway vanished. She returned to Dry Snap Canyon. This time, she didn't come alone. She stood at the edge of the pit where Piper had been exhumed. It was empty now, filled in by the forensic team. But she knew the shape. She knelt and pressed her hand to the soil. "They buried her facing east," she said softly. "That was their way." Maya was standing a few feet back. "Elise, what exactly did they think you were?" Elise looked up. "A witness. A witness to what?" She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and said, "To the return of the hollow. To the final rising. They believed they were preserving something. Sleeping. She paused. "They didn't think I was an outsider. They thought I was a messenger." Maya felt something tighten in her chest, because this wasn't over. The people of the Amiku hadn't just kidnapped a ranger. They had been waiting for one. Elise wasn't a victim. She was a trigger. The drone team returned to the deep. Shaft on. November 1st, with reinforced signal boosters and a new sensor package. At 138 feet. The feed cut again, but not before one last frame transmitted. A still image. The slab had moved, and under it bones, arranged in a circle, not buried, displayed, and at the center, it's carved into the floor, a new symbol, 3 vertical lines, converging. At the top, a trident, not like the triangle dash and dash line older, and in the corner of the frame a hand bare, human, resting on the stone, motionless, facing the camera. Maya stared at the image for a long time, then looked at. "Elise, have you ever seen that symbol?" Elise looked down, then quietly turned up the cuff of her uniform, etched into the skin of her wrist, dash faint, healed, but unmistakable, the same symbol, branded into her. "I didn't ask for it," she whispered, "but they said I'd carry it. Forever." Maya leaned forward, the weight of it all settling like stone. "Elise, are you still part of them?" Elise's face didn't change. Her eyes didn't blink. She only said, "I don't think I ever had a choice." The photograph of the underground chamber changed everything. The bones, the slab, the symbol. And the hand, it wasn't fossilized, wasn't skeletal. It was human, recent, and it was deliberate. Resting atop the stone like an offering fingers. Open, palm up. Maya Rennick had been in law enforcement for 16 years. She'd worked homicides, disappearances, cult investigations, arson, narcotics. She'd been embedded in extraction teams and had stared down killers, but nothing in her career prepared her for what she was looking at now, because this wasn't a crime scene, it was a message, and it had waited, buried in silence, for nearly a century. By November 3rd, excavation on the chamber was underway. The shaft was deep too narrow for conventional lifts. Engineers reinforced the tunnel's interior with carbon steel ribbing and a tri-point anchor rig. A rope team led by Search Commander Anna descended first. The temperature dropped 15 degrees by the time they reached 120 feet, at 137. Their floodlights caught the edge of the stone room. They radioed in. Chamber confirmed. No movement. Entering now. Then came a moment of eerie silence, followed by, "We need medical down here," and forensic. Right now, what they found was only partly consistent with the drone photo. The bones were still there, arranged in a perfect circle around the slab. The carved trident symbol was centered beneath them, etched into the floor so deeply it seemed to drink the light. But the hand was gone. In its place, a single object, a brass coin. No mint mark, date. Just a raised, weathered. The image of the triangle dash and dash line, and on the reverse, KHCTHE initials again. Like a curse that refused to die. Maya stared at it from the edge of the shaft, clutching the evidence bag with gloved hands. "What the hell is this?" she whispered. Beside her, Elise stood still, staring into the darkness below. "They're trying to tell you it's not over," she said. "That it never was." That night, Elise didn't sleep. She sat cross-legged in the cabin Marshall had built for her years ago, her old ranger badge on the table beside a mug of untouched tea. She was thinner now, her features more angular, but her voice had returned. It was steady. She flipped through her personal notebook, the one she'd hidden from the hollow. It was filled with sketches, patterns, references to the assembly's strange scripture. Most of it read like madness, repetition, obsession. But one page was different. At the top, scrawled in larger handwriting, the 3 doors. Below it, first door, of root and bone. Second door, of witness and flame. Third door, of returno. Explanations, just a note under the last line. When the third opens, no breath may follow. She tore the page out and handed it to Maya. "They believe the chamber was the second door," she said. "A passage. The final one isn't a place." Maya looked at her. "Then what is it?" Elise met her gaze. "A choice." By November 5th, word had spread to Washington. Maya received a call from the director of the National Park Service. A decision had been made. The Hollow Basin and surrounding sectors were to be closed indefinitely. Under a preservation emergency clause, all personnel were to be recalled. Further investigation would require congressional oversight and interdepartmental clearance. Maya knew. What that meant, they were being shut down. Not because the case was solved, but because it was too big, too strange, too historic, too dangerous. But Maya didn't plan to leave. Not yet. There was one thing she hadn't told her superiors. Not even Marshall. Not even Elise. 2 days earlier, one of the drone teams had picked up a second chamber. Smaller, no heat signature, no bones. But deep, nearly 160 feet, the signal had been corrupted. Only 2 frames came through. The first showed a wall with handprints. Dozens of them. Some faint, some fresh. The second showed something else entirely. A body still face down, dressed in what appeared to be a ranger uniform, but not Elise's, and not any current issue. Maya had matched the insignia. It dated back to the 1930s. She brought the images to Elise in secret, laid them out slowly on the table. Elise paled. "That's not possible," she said. Maya said nothing. Elise pointed to the handprint on the wall. "That pattern. That's the sign of the bound," she whispered. "They said only one had ever returned from the hollow. The first ranger. The one who walked too far. The one who was buried without death." Maya leaned in. "You think that's real?" Elise's eyes never left the photo. "I don't think." "It matters what I believe," she said. Then quietly, "I think someone buried him alive." The next day, Maya made a decision. She wasn't going to wait for permission. She assembled a team 4 of her most trusted agents, plus Jesse the tracker, and Elise. Because Elise knew the signs, the voices. The ritual, the plan was simple. Descend to the second chamber, confirm the identity of the body, extract it for forensic analysis. They began their descent at 3:43 a.m. on November 6. By 4:12, they reached the lip of the second. Shaft by for 18. They entered the chamber, and everything changed. The room was dry, cold, silent, no bones. No altar, just a dirt floor covered in soot and strange concentric markings. And the body, it was face down, its arms outstretched, still clad in a ranger's uniform. But when Maya rolled it over, wasn't just old, it was perfectly preserved. The face hadn't rotted. The hands were intact. The eyes still closed. Looked like they could open at any moment. Elise gasped. "That's him," she whispered. "The bound one." Maya looked at her. "You're sure?" Elise nodded, then froze. "Wait." She moved. Closer, knelt beside the figure, tugged up the sleeve, and stared, tattooed into the man's forearm, in crisp, unfaded ink. "Property of KHC." Maya stepped back. "What does that mean?" Elise's voice cracked. "It means he didn't just follow the hollow. He belonged to it." And then, as Maya turned away to call the surface team, the body moved. Not a twitch, not a reflex. The hand rose, just an inch, but upward, as if reaching. For the ceiling, as if feeling for breath, Elise screamed. Maya spun, gun drawn. The hand fell again. Stillness. But it had moved. They all saw it. Jesse crossed himself. One of the agents muttered a prayer. Maya stared at the corpse, or what she thought had been a corpse because now she wasn't sure at all. And then she noticed something. The dirt, it was shifting, beneath the slab. Under the body, a ripple almost. Imperceptible, but spreading, like something was breathing. Underneath them, they left the chamber at full speed, back to the shaft, back to the surface. But Elise stopped at the lip. She turned, looked back into the dark, and whispered, "It's waking." Maya pulled her out. They sealed the shaft, filed the report, classified every frame of drone footage, then burned the rope ladder. The team dispersed. Silence returned. But in the days that followed, Rangers started reporting strange sounds in the northeast quadrant. Scratches, rhythmic hums. Wind that didn't match the trees, and on November 12th, trail cam deep in the basin captured an image. It showed the altar, empty, except for a coin, brass, with the triangle, and a single word etched below. It returning. On November 13th, Maya Rennick tendered her resignation. She handed in her badge, her weapon, and her clearance ID at 7:42 a.m., sharp, no fanfare, no press release. The only people present were Director Hennessy from the Bureau's Special Investigations Unit and a junior officer who looked like he'd never seen anyone quit like that before. "Reason for departure?" Hennessy asked, glancing at the blank line on the form. Maya looked at him dead in the eye. "Because we stopped asking the right questions." She signed the form, turned on her heel, and walked out. Behind her, the Bureau sealed the hollow. Officially, unofficially. That was another story. Because even with the perimeter cordoned off, even with the satellite access restricted and the tunnels collapsed, signs kept appearing. Trail cameras that hadn't worked in years suddenly sent motion alerts. Bones small, ones arranged in perfect geometric patterns, left in plain view along ranger trails. And worst of all, dash coins. Always the same brass, no date. No value, just the triangle, and the word returning. Elise didn't sleep much after the chamber. She'd stayed quiet during the debrief, answering only what she had to, avoiding eye contact with the newer agents. They didn't know her. They didn't understand the hollow. They thought it was some backwoods cult story. Weird, tragic, done. But she knew better. One night, a week after the second chamber was sealed, she slipped out of her temporary ranger cabin and walked to the place they had buried Piper the second time. She sat at the base of a pine tree, listening not to the wind, to the silence beneath it, and there it was again, breathing faint, faint below. She knew that sound. She'd heard it for months in the dark, not her own, not Piper's. Something older, something waiting. Marshall tried to keep her grounded. He cooked for her, talked with her, gave her space when she needed it. But even he knew Elise wasn't really back, not completely. "You're thinking about going in again," he said one night. Elise didn't deny it, because they haven't stopped. "You saw the coin?" Marshall nodded. "And the handprint on your window?" She froze. What? He walked to the far wall of the cabin, pulled the curtain aside. Moonlight poured through, and there it was, smudged across the glass. 5 long fingers, thin, gray with ash. Dragged down the pane, it hadn't been there the night before. Elise stepped forward, looked closer. Her breath fogged the glass, and the handprint matched hers. Not just the size, the scar on the thumb, the slope of the pinky, the exact same hand. She backed away, pulse hammering. No, she whispered. I know. I didn't. She turned to Marshall. They marked me. At the same time, Maya was in Flagstaff, standing in the basement of a university. Archive, the folder she requested, had been locked in cold storage since 1954. It bore no label. Only a stamped code, CRO73KH. Inside, photographs, journals, topographic maps, and one document that made Maya's hands go still. A transcription of a field report dated 1933. Authored by a ranger named Clarence Holloway, one of the first to survey the canyon system that would later become part of Salt River National Park. He had written about an unsanctioned settlement deep in the northeast quadrant, but it wasn't. What he said that made Maya's stomach drop. It was the drawing on the last page, a triangle, split by a vertical line, and beneath it, in a trembling hand, one walked in, none walked out. But we still hear his breath beneath the stone. Maya closed the folder. It hadn't started with Elise. It hadn't even started with KHC, this thing, the hollow. A symbol. It's a bound one. It had roots older than anyone thought. Possibly pre-colonial. Possibly prehistoric. Elise returned to the basin on November 20th alone. She didn't tell Maya. Didn't tell Marshall. Just packed what she needed. Rope, water, her old ranger compass. The coin and the thistle pouch. She reached the ridge. Just before dawn, the hollow was quiet. Still, the wind had dropped. The trees didn't move. No birds, no insects, only the sound of breath, not hers. Below, she made her way to the deep shaft. The one that had been sealed. The Bureau had buried it under rock and concrete. But they hadn't accounted for erosion. And something or someone had already begun digging it out. Opening was narrow, barely shouldered width. She slipped inside. Down, deeper, past the first landing, past the second, into the part of the hollow one had dared map. She followed the wind, the warmth, the breathing, until she saw it. Again, the third door. It wasn't a literal door, not this time. It was a space. A threshold marked in soot and stone, and there, kneeling on the other side, was the man from the chamber. The one they thought was dead. He was older. Pale, but not decomposed. Not a ghost. He looked up as she approached. His voice was dry, raspy. You brought the seed? Elise nodded, held up the pouch. I was marked, she said. I didn't ask for it. You were chosen, the man said. No, Elise said, stepping forward. Chose this. And then she dropped the pouch on the ground between them. The thistles. Spilled, the scent filled the air. The chamber shuddered. Stone-cracked light dashed somehow from deep. Below rose through the fissures. The triangle symbol on the floor lit up, and the man bowed. Elise closed her eyes. She could feel it now. All of it. The hollow wasn't a place. It was a threshold. And she was now standing on its other side. Maya found the empty bed. 2 days later, no note. No sign of struggle. Just the ranger. Uniform, folded neatly with the brass coin on top and a single line carved into the wood of the bedside table. The third door opens for her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she took the coin, placed it in her pocket, and walked outside. The trees were still, the sky pale with morning. But beneath her feet, just for a moment, she swore she felt the earth breathe. Salt River National Park was quiet again, not the kind of quiet tourists come for their rustling leaves. River in the distance kind. This was emptier, like the land itself had held its breath. Maya. Rennick stood on the overlook near Fire Notch Trail. Staring across the valley where the hollow had once been active, no recent footprints, No trail cams triggered. No new bones, no symbols, no Elise. It had been 12 days since her disappearance. Officially, the case was closed. The FBI had reclassified it as a voluntary vanishing. Elise Calloway, survivor of the Hollow cult, had chosen to return to isolation, unofficially. Maya didn't buy that for a second, because the Hollow didn't let you go, not unless you gave it something in return. And Elise had already given too much. That morning, Maya visited Marshall. He hadn't left his cabin in days. The only sin, he was still alive. The firewood chopped and stacked in near-perfect piles, like he was trying to outwork grief. She knocked once. No answer, then opened the door. He was sitting at the table, thumbing through one of Elise's old notebooks, the one she'd written in during the early Hollow patrols. Without looking up, he said, "You know she's not dead." Maya stayed silent. She wasn't finished. I could feel it. Even when she smiled, she always had one foot back there. He slid the notebook toward her. She picked it up. On the last page, scrawled in faded pencil, "The breath isn't what scares me. It's the silence that comes after." Maya exhaled. "She went in alone," she said. Marshall nodded. "Because she knew we wouldn't follow. She didn't want us to." Exactly. Later that week, Maya hiked to the deep shaft again. She wasn't supposed to access was sealed, signs posted, trail cameras hidden in the brush. But she knew the rangers running perimeter, and she knew how to move unnoticed. The shaft had been reburied. Concrete now, reinforced. It's hardened like a tombstone, but someone had left something behind. Right in the center of the slab, a single, perfect pine cone, balanced on its tip, wrapped with a strip of old canvas, ranger uniform material, and written. Across the fabric in what looked like ash, the third breath, Maya stared at it for a long time. This wasn't folklore anymore. This wasn't even about Elise. It was about whatever the Hollow really was. Because the people had names. The cult had scripture. The survivors had trauma. But the place had willed. Elise had described it once, back when she first returned, before the final descent, before she slipped away for good. Maya remembered the conversation clearly now. It had been cold that night, a thin layer of snow on the pine. "Needles," Elise had said. "It doesn't want worship. It doesn't want blood. It wants memory." Maya hadn't understood what she meant. Now she did. Because over the past 2 weeks, the Hollow hadn't just taken a person. It had rearranged the past. Reports were disappearing. Files corrupted. Aerial photographs with odd blurs, timestamps, vanishing. A camera trap set in quadrant H14 deep northeast had been active since 2021. It hadn't pinged once. Until now, a ranger technician flagged it while cataloging equipment. The alert came through at 3:17 a.m. 1. Photo, black and white, grainy dot. It showed a figure standing in the clearing near. It's the old wind chime tree. Not Elise, not anyone known, but the uniform matched exactly identical to the one in that second chamber. The 1930s issue. And the face it was smiling. Lips curled slightly. One eye squinting, as if it recognized the camera. The timestamp read, July 13th, 1933. Impossible. The camera hadn't even existed then, but the image was there. Maya met with Jesse Greaves again, the tracker who'd been part of the descent team. He'd been quiet lately off-grid, spending his nights in the older ranger stations. Far from roads. When she found him, he looked thinner, tired but not surprised to see her. "I've been hearing it too," he said before she could even speak. "The breathing?" He shook his head, the whispers. Maya frowned. He leaned forward, took her hand, and pressed something into her palm. A small, folded square of leather. She opened it slowly. Inside, a coin. Not brass, not etched, but soft, like it had been chewed, and on it, embedded in the leather, 3 lines. Vertical, converging at the top. The trident, same as the floor. "Symbol in the chamber," Jesse whispered. "They're not just returning. They're recruiting. Marshall went missing on December 2nd. He'd last. Ben seen leaving his cabin at sunset. No note. No signs of a struggle. Just an empty porch. A cold fire pit. And his radio still turned to Channel 6. His ranger log was open on the desk. One final entry. She called to me. I answered. If you read this, don't follow. They mounted a search team anyway. Maya wasn't part of it. She knew better now. The Hollow didn't like to be chased. It liked to be found. On December 7th, the last camera near the basin caught something else. A new symbol. Burned into a tree. Triangle. Line. Trident. All three, overlapping, and beneath it. In carved letters, one walked in. She opens the door. We follow Maya. Stared at the photo for a long time. Then she pulled out the old coin. Still in her coat pocket, she flipped it over for the first time. The back had changed where once it read. Returning now, it said, breathtaking, there was a clearing near Dry Snap. Canyon where the air always felt thin, no matter the time of year. No matter the temperature, Elise once said it was the crossroads. Where the Hollow touched the world, Maya. Went there one last time. Alone, no radio, no weapon. She knelt in the pine needles, closed her eyes, and listened, not for footsteps, not for whispers, not for breathing, but for silence. And when it came, when that strange, cold stillness blanketed everything, she whispered back, I remember you. Because maybe that's what it really wanted. Not obedience, not fear. Memory, the Hollow had taken Elise. But maybe she'd gone willingly. Maybe she'd opened the third door. And Mayashi was standing in its shadow now, and she wasn't sure if she'd walk away. December 21st, 2022. The winter solstice. The shortest day of the year. Maya Rennick stood at the edge of the Hollow Basin. Dawn rising cold and blue across the peaks, casting thin glacial light across the tree line. The forest was utterly still, the kind of stillness that made your ears ring. She hadn't told anyone she was here, not the Bureau, not the Rangers, not even Jesse. The cameras were all down now, trails closed for the season. The official position was that Salt River's northeast. Quadrant was under geological remediation. But Maya knew the truth. There was no fixing this land. Not anymore. The night before. She'd made her decision. She'd read every page of Elise's field notebooks, reviewed the photos, traced the coordinates, memorized the sequence of 3 symbols triangle line, trident like a prayer she didn't believe in, and then she opened the drawer of her nightstand. The coin was waiting, still warm, or maybe. She only imagined that on one side, the triangle. On the other, the words had changed again. Now it read, The breath is yours. Maya had stared at it for a long time, and then packed her gear. No gun. Just the coin, a rope, and Elise's compass. She passed the site of the wind chime tree just before noon. The chimes were gone, now taken by the Bureau, most likely, or torn down by winter storms. But the energy in the air was still there. She could feel it in her skin, her bones. The tension that rose in her jaw for no reason, like her body knew something her mind did. From there she cut northeast, through uncharted forests, following nothing but instinct, or maybe Elise's path. There were no footprints, no trail markers, but she found the shaft anyway. Exactly where it was supposed to be. And it was open. The concrete seal was cracked, a jagged wound across the surface, like something had forced its way out, or drawn something in. The wind sighed out of the opening, low and steady. It didn't sound natural. It sounded like breath. Maya rappelled, down hand over hand, silent. Focused, her muscles burned from the cold. She didn't stop. She reached the landing at 137 feet. The first chamber, still the slab in the center, was shattered now, broken into pieces like glass. The circle of bones was gone, but something else remained. On the far wall, a new message, scrawled in soot. You took your breath. Now give it back. Beneath that, a single HAND. Prind. My moved bath may have moved past the first chamber, past the second, into the tunnels beneath. It shouldn't have been possible. The chambers had collapsed during the last extraction, but now the passage was clear. Walls smooth as if carved by water and time. The symbols grew denser, tridents, lines, eyes, open mouths, and something else. Words in English, Latin, in runes she didn't recognize. The deeper she went, the more. Time unraveled. Light didn't behave correctly. Her own breathing echoed backward. At one point, her flashlight began to flicker, then stuttered out completely. But the tunnel walls began to glow on their own. A dull, gold light. Pulsing alive, she didn't panic. She let it take her. The final chamber wasn't vast. It wasn't even a room, exactly. It was a pocket, a hollow. In the stone, it's barely enough space to kneel. And in the center, Elise, she was sitting cross-legged, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Alive, Maya, she whispered, before even opening her eyes. Maya fell to her knees. Elise. She reached forward, but stopped. Elise's hands were held just above the floor, palms up, resting, and in the center of the chamber. The breath, that's what Maya realized it was. Not wind, not air, not spirit, but breath itself, held there, suspended, ancient and warm. Softly between the two of them, like it was deciding who to choose, Elise finally looked up. You came. Of course I did. You weren't supposed to. I never listened. Well, Elise smiled, just barely. Then they offered me a choice. 5 years ago, when they took me, they said I could walk free. But if I did, the breath would fade, and it would wake wrong. Maya swallowed. So you stayed. I held it for as long as I could. Tears in her eyes now, but it's too big, Maya, and it knows you now. Maya looked at the coin in her hand. It had grown warm, molten. The triangle glowed. Then, in a voice not hers, not Elise's, not anyone's she heard, will you breathe for her now? Maya's hands shook. Elise bowed her head, and Maya understood. Not with logic, not with science, but with knowing. This wasn't death. It wasn't sacrifice. It was containment, and someone had to carry it. So Maya took a breath. A long, deliberate one. And as she exhaled, the coin vanished from her palm. The light dimmed. The stone cracked. Beneath them, and Elise opened her eyes fully. For the first time in years, they were hers again. She stood. Thank you, she whispered. Maya smiled faintly, then knelt. Palms up, eyes closed, and the hollow took her. Elise emerged from the shaft 4 days later. She was found by a search drone. Collapsed at the tree line, whispering only one thing over and over. She walks for me now. They reopened Salt River quietly the following spring. Tourists returned. Rangers rotated in. New trails were marked. No one spoke of the hollow. Not publicly, but in the northeast quadrant. Single tree remained untouched, burned into its trunk. Triangle, line, trident, and beneath it. Breath held. No one could explain it, but some rangers claimed that if you stood there long enough, in the right kind of silence, you could feel it too. A presence, a breath, still held by someone who chose to remember, by someone who refused to let it wake. And that's how the story ends. Not with a bang, but with a breath taken, held, and never returned.